Super. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to the 9 o'clock session on climate resilient infrastructure solutions for low carbon and resilient development in Africa. We're still waiting for one of our speakers, so we'll start in 1 or 2 minutes. So make yourself comfortable. We have French and English simultaneous translation available. We have some of the speakers planning their intervention in English, some of them in Spanish, in French. So if you need simultaneous translation, we have the headsets just here over the translation box. Make yourself comfortable. We start in 2 minutes. Good morning again. Welcome. My name is Markus Meyer. I'm the coordinator of the Urban and Municipal Development Fund from the African Development Bank. I would like to welcome you to our session this morning on climate-proof infrastructure solutions for low-carbon and resilient development in Africa. I would like to welcome you, and I would like to just briefly set the scene. Urban development and climate resilient infrastructure is not anymore a discussion of if this is something that needs to be done, that should be done, but the question is only what should be done. I would like to invite Professor Nicola Tollin to the stage to give us a small background and input. The 54 African countries have submitted their NDCs to the convention, and we have analyzed together with the University of Southern Denmark the urban development content in those NDCs. And as I said, it's not anymore a matter of if, but just a matter of what. And so to give us a little scientific input, I would like to invite Professor Nicola Tollin from the University of Southern Denmark to give us a small summary of those findings. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Marcus. And first of all, I would like to thank for the invitation the African Development Bank Group and partner organization. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss about climate policy and climate action in Africa. If you will allow me, I think that this work took quite some time and effort to be realized, so I would like to take the opportunity to express my gratitude to the team of the African Development Bank, particularly Markus Meyer, that's also co-author of this report, Micheline Sardogo, that has been coordinating the work, and all the colleagues like Ole and Charlie, that has been very much supporting making this happening, and also the team at the UNESCO Chair on Urban Resilience at the University of Southern Denmark, that's composed by very strong-hearted and working female author. That's Maria Pizzorni and Ainhoa Sauri Gasquez and Patrizia Gragnanova. Having said that, I would like just today to give some highlights of what we found in this study. So as Marcus was saying, we were, just a second. Sorry, yes. We have been analyzing the urban content of the National Timing Contribution in Africa submitted to UNECA by June this year. But before getting into that, I would like to use the own word of the forward of this report, saying that 950 million people more will be living in Africa in the next few years. That's actually our starting point, to see how the urban population in Africa will be subject to the impact of climate change and can be instrumental to reduce the causes of climate change, meaning mitigating our action. So the report has been analyzing all the NDCs submitted to UNECA. We use a system of 200 indicators to analyze these NDCs. These indicators were looking particularly at challenges, meaning the problem that NDCs are looking at urban level and the national level by sector for mitigation and by sector for adaptation. And then we look at which way the NDC are stating that urban action shall take place, which are the responses to these challenges, both by sector for mitigation and adaptation, and we look also at which are the key climate risks, particularly for cities. What we found was a very good result in terms of the urban content within African NDCs. 91% of the NDCs submitted by African countries are considering city at the heart of the NDCs. This is a percentage much higher compared to a global study we realized with UN Habitat on the 193 NDCs at global level, which are only 2 out of 3 are having some urban content. And again, I'm going back to this urgency and this pattern for a strong and rapid urbanization of the continent. Here you can see a completely blue map that's representing in different shades of blue the strong urban content, meaning the NDCs that are very clearly defining urban sector as a key priority. In mid blue, we have the countries that are defining and that are mentioning urban sector either for challenges or responses or for mitigation and adaptation, and in light blue, the countries that are not mentioning explicitly urban. This doesn't mean that these countries and these NDCs, they're not doing anything urban, but they're not including this in the key climate policy for the country. Moreover, as you can see here, and this is another very positive discovery or finding of our research, is that most of the NDC with urban content are looking jointly at mitigation and adaptation. This is once more showing that in the city we cannot take a divided and sectorial approach. We need to integrate action, also to make good use of the resources available. Here we have been looking specifically at which are the financial requests and if these financial requests contained in the NDCs are actually quantified. Practically all countries are making financial requests, and these financial requests are quantified. Here we see a lot of potential for supporting countries in order to develop specific and quantified financial requests regarding urban sector, because this is really much a key. Now I would like just to get a little bit of a deep dive into some of the mitigation, adaptation and risk that we've been looking at. Here you see the number of NDCs that are looking at mitigation, either on challenges, mentioning key problems regarding mitigation in cities, or in responses, meaning either specific local strategies or action or projects in the cities for climate mitigation. And as you can see here, and I'm sorry, but I need to improvise a bit because my sight is very bad this morning, and I cannot, and I want not to give you false information. Basically, the key sector for mitigation at urban level, for the number of NDCs that are mentioning it, it's waste, energy, and transport and mobility. Here you can see in the orange part there is the challenges. This means that countries are specifically identifying some issue at urban level in this sector and saying we are emitting too much on transport, we are emitting too much for energy at urban level. But here you can see that actually the action, the responses are higher in number than the challenges. And this is a common pattern that we see also at global level, and we see in Africa also for adaptation. And it means that the NDC are not including a full baseline of data about which are the problems. This is creating a little bit a strange loop, because it's not possible to figure out if there is a direct correlation between the action that are listed in the NDC against the challenges, and also makes it a little bit more difficult to monitor, report and validate if the action has been having an impact, because we're missing a baseline. Doesn't mean that the country have not been making the work, just means that in most of the cases the country are just referring to something else and it's not clearly stated in the NDC. Here we are looking at the adaptation against challenges and responses, and the key sector here is water. Follow very closely by something very important also for the work that African development is doing, and its infrastructures, more in general. And we see also that coastal area it's having quite a significant number of NDCs mentioning it. Here we are looking at specific risks that, and the most important thing here is that most of the risk, the highest risk is regarding floods, but most of it is actually regarding either excess water or lack of water. And the number here are quite low, meaning that some more analysis eventually on the actual risk shall be included in the future in the NDCs. Here I will not read all the key findings. You can find it completely in the report, that it's here around different part of the room. But again, most of African countries are looking at urban sector as a key priority. There is a good number of these countries that's having a strong urban content, and this is a much higher percentual compared to the global study we realized. And there is also a pattern from the previous study we did in 2016 that more and more the urban content is getting stronger. Then mitigation and adaptation are combined in this NDC, and there is still a gap in identifying specific challenges and specific risk. As I said, key mitigation action is on waste, energy and transport. Instead for adaptation, it's water, infrastructure and coastal areas. And there is a clear request also for financial help, and there is also some consistent request in terms of technology and capacity building. Here are some recommendations that we can discuss better during the panel discussion, and that we need to analyze better this NDC at country level in depth in order to use this type of analysis as an appraisal tool to check the projects that are coming in, if they are aligned and in which way to the national policies, because this is a key criteria for bankability. We need also to strengthen the local action and give the instrument to local authorities already to develop projects that are aligned with the national policies. The integrated identification on low carbon pathways and resilience development is absolutely key in order also to make better use of our resources in the cities. And again, the importance of strengthening institution also with the capacity building. Just to conclude, what we are looking for the next step is to get more in-depth country-by-country type of analysis, to look also a number of cross-cutting issues that we just haven't defined very much in depth, but we have already the data we need to analyze, for example, regarding nature-based solution, circular economy, and all these things, and also to integrate this analysis with national adaptation policies and long-term low emission strategies. And that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Tollin, for this great input and for providing the stage for our continuous discussions. I just want to invite all of you to grab one of those reports that have been launched here at COP and read through it, the rich data analysis for yourself, and see what are the relevant elements for you. I'm now happy to invite our distinguished panel to the floor. I would like to start with Dr. Sam Egube, Commissioner for Economic Planning and Budget from Lagos State. Welcome. Please have a seat. I'm also very happy to invite Sheikh Mbou, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Directeur Général du Centre de Suivi Écologique du Sénégal. I'm also very happy to invite Director Mike Salawu, Director for Infrastructure and Urban Development from the African Development Bank. I would like to invite Lucy Anderton from the International Union of Railways. I would like to invite Nitin Jain from the leader infrastructure specialist and nature-based solutions from the Global Center of Adaptation. And sorry, Nicola, I think I did this wrong with the chairs. Please stay with us. I'll get you a chair in a second. Just one sec. And so we have heard that infrastructure is a key response of countries' commitments under the Paris Agreement. Key response to support adaptation to climate change, and a key response to support low carbon development in Africa. And I would like to start the distinguished panel to welcome all of you. Thanks for your time and thanks for being here with us from different walks of life, different institutions, different backgrounds. And I would like to put the first questions to all of you to give us a little bit, a 2, 3, 4 minute summary and a global view on what your institution is doing to develop and support low carbon and resilient infrastructure. I will then go to a second question to see what can we do together to scale up and provide more rapid development of low carbon and resilient infrastructure. So I would like to start with you, Mike. Give us a small global view on what the African Development Bank has been doing in the last 2-3 years to support low carbon and resilient infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Marcus, and good morning, dear colleagues and dear participants. And I'm delighted to be here. I think this is a very great panel. where we have a combination of, learning institution, the University of Southern Denmark, who just gave us now very important food for thought, and also some organization for transport sector here, countries and MDBs like African Development Bank. From the bank perspective, as you can expect, we are a financing institution that cares about climate damage and climate opportunity as well. We see it both ways. And in so doing, we have been laying out our policies and strategies at the bank that really foster our intervention in mainstreaming what we call a climate change solutions in our operation, whether it's from agriculture, looking at adaptation, transport, water, energy, urban development, and also on the social sector, where we start looking at how we mainstream climate change in education and all those things. So the bank has been laying out these policies. We have our climate change policies. We have a lot of strategies, instruments. We have a whole department in charge of this, and also mobilizing climate finance. Because on one hand, you have to pay attention to the constraints posed by climate change. On the other hand, to alleviate those constraints, you must mobilize the adequate financing. And that's one aspect. On the, what I would call a midstream side of things, that's where the bank, support countries in their, first of all, in their NDCs, and also in adequately designing and preparing their investment plan that is climate friendly. So we look at how countries' investment framework, infrastructure programming framework, or public investment framework are actually taking into account the climate aspect of things. That's what we do through the so-called country dialogue, which we do with the countries, which eventually will produce a paper we call country strategic paper, where we really see the articulation of country's vision translating into investment program. That's critical for us because everything starts from there. Secondly, we now get down to what we call investment program, where we support countries' capacity to prepare quality climate, green infrastructure projects. That goes through the many instruments that the bank has. Some of them are project preparation. Marcus Meyer here is a coordinator for one of them, the Urban Municipality Development Fund, UMDF, which help your countries, our countries, to prepare bankable projects which integrate climate change analysis and so on. And in so doing, we also have a partnership with the GCA, the Global Center for Adaptation, through what we call a AAAP, Accelerated African Adaptation Program, whereby we partner with GCA to really assess the climate risk in a project. And that's what the professor just laid out for us now, that this is critically important to adequately assess the climate risk. Then you bring about the adequate responses. So that is what we do systematically now in our program. And then on the downstream, where we now bring financing, we have a whole department that mobilizes climate finance for us in order to give the right incentive to countries to invest in climate-friendly program. The bank, president of the bank, President Adesina, has announced mobilization of 25 billion for climate adaptation in the next 5 years. This is the target we set for ourselves. This is what we are working towards, and we do this in partnership also with some of you here, and we'll continue mobilizing funding for this. So this is something that we want to do to help Africa, but it's not enough. It's not enough, and in addition, what the bank is also doing to really leverage partnership, some of you were here last week, we launched what we call AGEA, which is Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa, which is an alliance we are building with MDBs, DFIs, and also some African institutions. DFIs, MDBs are global MDBs, right? We even have foundations like Rockefeller Foundation. They were here on this very same panel, I think last Wednesday, where this initiative was launched. The ambition for us with this initiative is to mobilize about 500 million to do project preparation and project development, green projects, to be able to mobilize 10 billion in downstream investment. So you can see the quantum of investment that the bank ambition to mobilize for climate change and climate adaptation, which is complementing what we call the climate action window, which is another initiative that the bank is promoting through its ADF cycle. And climate action window is really to tackle the incremental cost or additional cost that's required to build climate resilient infrastructure. You will agree here with me that today we build infrastructure in Africa. They don't last long because they are affected by climate change. It's real. You build a road in Africa today, you will give it 5 years to still see the road. After 5 years, then you start seeing half of the road, okay? But if you build infrastructure in Norway, in Denmark, you know, France, Germany, you're looking at infrastructure that will last maybe 15, 20 years without any major, you know, maintenance program, because it's quality build and climate maybe also not affecting it that much as we are affected in Africa. So we are aware of that because it costs countries a lot of money, budgetary. And the bank, they come back to us again 5 years to rebuild a new road. So we want to build climate resiliency by promoting what we call a climate action window, which now we're going to mobilize additional resources that's required to climate-proof this investment, and therefore increase the life cycle approach for this investment. So these are some of the things we are doing in the African Development Bank. I can talk about this more and more, but let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Moving now to Mr. Anderton. Railways have been historically associated with development and are also a low-carbon way of moving goods and people around. So please tell us a little bit about UIC's role in promoting railway development and climate action in Africa.
Thank you, Marcus. And first of all, thank you so much for having me on this fabulous panel of experts. It's a real pleasure to work with you, and we will be great allies, I'm sure, in terms of really helping our members in Africa to expand and make really great low-carbon transport in Africa through the railways. So UIC, International Union of Railways, we're 100 years old, so we're an old institution and truly global. We have been global from the very beginning and always there to help our members to develop harmonious, interoperable railways together and really build solidarity across the railway community globally. So we're in 90 different countries with almost 200 members all over the world, and of course in Africa as well as all the other regions. So that allows, as a global organization, to really connect the railway community globally. And so the most powerful thing we can do is really that sharing of lessons learned and co-creating harmonious. So we have technical specifications that they come together and design together so that it really encourages international interoperable movement of goods and people, and really helps support those looking to expand railways, that they are able to learn from the lessons of countries that already have well-developed railways. So it's really that sort of region to region, as well as within region lesson learning and best practice sharing that we do. But we also do research and technical solutions to really support that railway community. In terms of adaptation, we've been working on that focus for quite some time. We have technical guidelines to help railways risk assess their own climate risk, essentially, climate adaptation risk, and so help them to understand how they can integrate more resilient design features into the way that they design and operate their railways. Because it's a real issue. Flooding is an obvious one, but also if it's an electrified railway, the overhead lines can be very easily damaged by high winds or sag when there's extreme temperatures. Tracks also either buckle or crack on extreme temperatures as well. So there's a whole range of different reasons why adaptation is important for railways. And so we're working with them together. We have working groups specifically on that. We just launched one on desertic conditions. So we're getting railways together that operate railways in deserts from all over the world. So Australia with Middle East, with Africa, and Southern Europe that can really share how desertic conditions particularly are special but keep operating railways in a reliable way, because it's so important that railways are reliable, are punctual, because we need people to use more trains. We need, as a climate solution, railway is a climate solution indeed. So, but only if that solution is reliable, is good quality, will people start to use it more, right? So it's so essential. We know, we're talking to the International Energy Agency, and they tell us that by 2030, the railway traffic needs to grow by more than 40%, which is huge. This is less than 10 years. We need to almost double, almost 50% growth, where we've really not moved at all in the last 10 years. And for passengers, it's only about 6 or 7%, including freight. It's only sort of 8% of trips taken or goods moved. So there's a real dramatic change that needs to take, and only by having a really reliable railway is that going to happen. So yeah, we've been working together, and that's why we're here at COP, to really promote the role of railways as a climate solution.
Thank you very much. Commissioner, Lagos is one of Africa's mega cities, already affected by climate change, sea level rise, flooding. What is Lagos State's vision to make the city more resilient, or the state more resilient, and help low carbon development of the communities and of the city-state? Please, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's just interesting hearing the comments from the platform, and thank you for inviting me. It just shows that Lagos is in good company. Lagos State is a low-lying state, it's a coastal state. It's, in terms of landmass, probably about 0.4% of the national landmass, and in terms of population, about 25 million people. So it's a very dense, low-lying place. We say it is the economic heartbeat of Nigeria and therefore of West Africa. And therefore it is vulnerable to flood and all of those climate sea level rises and so on and so forth. And now Lagos has continued to take very, very courageous and bold actions. We've had a plan around mitigation, and that basically focuses on waste management. We produce over 14,000 metric tons of waste every day. We have a plan around our energy systems and around transportation. So we're deploying about 6 color-coded railway systems. We've started with 2. 2 of those will probably move through some of the most populous environments or counties in the state. And we believe that it will help the entire climate mitigation space. However, as we drive this, we see the trajectory of greenhouse gases, and we know that just driving mitigation is not enough. Lagos will need to adapt, right? And in terms of adaptation, we have undertaken an approach that is evidence-based. So thank you very much for what we are presenting. It's very evidence-based, that basically tries to evaluate where the risks are and what the cost of inaction will be. We've evaluated and estimated that it will cost us about $30 billion if we do nothing in Lagos. But Lagos would always continue to do stuff to push the needle forward. If you recall, there was a time we responded to rising seawater by creating an entire new city, the Eco-Atlantic City. And that city was created with a view of resilience and climate proofing ahead. So those are some of the things we do. These insights, which we have gotten from the studies and the evaluation, does show that if we invested about $5 billion, we should be able to build a Lagos state that is resilient in terms of its infrastructure and in terms of its public spaces. We believe we should be able to build more resilient communities and also our ability to respond to climate movements, okay, and to protect the vulnerable in our communities. We also feel we'll be better able to build systems that allow us to proactively respond and anticipate flood risks, and then be able to protect the environment and respond in such crises. So we are pushing the levers and, of course, inviting investment. When we look at the cost of doing nothing at 30 billion, that is probably about 10 times the budget of Lagos State. What that means is that we need partners. We've come to COP27 to say, look, can we get partners? Maybe not too much, 5, 10, as much as we can get. And we've separated the narration around this project around basically funds that should come in grants form, very small percentage of that. A lot of it on the, from low interest public financing, and quite a bit, about 25 to 30% of those projects, right, can come out of commercial lending. And it's in that area we seek to partner with people, companies and development entities like the African Development Bank to develop further some of these projects, to push ahead the planning for it, and then to prepare for implementing some of these projects that are already ready to go. We believe that if we did like 18 kilometers of embankment, it could actually save about 1.4 to 2 million people from needing to move out or to be dislocated. That cost, for example, is about $1 billion to do just that. And the cost of not doing is about 5 billion. So you could see the socioeconomic return on investment that is possible. We also feel we could work more collaboratively with the private sector to build up models that connect them to the loss, right? And then create systems around our partners that will help us move. So we are looking at blended kind of financing, putting in insurance also with it. Thankfully, we just signed an insurance program which AXA Climate is leading, basically to protect parametric insurance cover to allow us respond very quickly in the event of flood. So we have these projects well defined, well articulated. Some of them we have begun the feasibility studies, and we're just looking for partners from here to work with us to drive the narration forward. We believe Lagos should be a model city for Africa in terms of resilience, and we're doing quite a bit to just drive that narration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Bao, moving into one very important sector of adaptation and resilience, nature, ecology, bringing green elements. What is the Centre de Suivi Écologique in Senegal doing to help the vision of Senegal to become a resilient country?
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for the panel to bring the perspective that Senegal has in this very important topic of infrastructure and climate change. I think it's kind of protracted across borders. It's not only African countries. When I heard the railroad initiative across the world, it seems to be an encompassing issue that most countries will face. Indeed, Senegal is about 17, 18 million, not the 25 million in Lagos. But that does not make it less a challenge when it comes to de-risking infrastructure, because the demand is there and the appetite to resolve these questions on a daily basis is absolutely critical and timely. We have developed a system which is just being initiated right now, where we try to get the wisdom of scientists with the practicality of developers to join hands to address those issues. There are two sides of it. The first side is the long-term perspective, as you all mentioned, because these things will happen and will be a real issue in the next 20, 30 years to come. But at the same time, we have a sense of urgencies where there are things which are already happening that needs to be resolved. So what CSE did with the research community, the big university, is to have a project with 4 pillars action. The first one is to master the knowledge that is required in terms of knowing what exactly climate change has as effect and impact on the infrastructure, mostly the road system. And we can have general blanket statement about it, but unless you know what exactly extreme events or saline soil or sand encroachment or biodiversity loss or those kind of stuff, without targeting the thematic place in which you invest, it becomes problematic. You can't do it without having the knowledge base on the upstream that help you think of what kind of solution you bring. And we try to do that with the perspective of the policymakers to project themselves in the next 20 years with the ambitious investment that they all have. All countries in Africa are talking about emergency plan. They're talking about, long-term development, accelerated development. And you can see it from the place of growth, of GDP growth related to the infrastructure, the tourist infrastructure, the railroad infrastructure, the roads infrastructure, but many other infrastructure are being projected to be a heavy investment place in the next 20 years to come. I'm sure Nigeria is doing the same. When I see the railroads in Nigeria and the big, toll roads, I'm really, really impressed how quick this country is being transformed. But we're doing it with a little mainstream of climate change into those processes. And that's really, I think, a classical mistake that will, catch up in the time, and we're trying to build science and policy connections in there. So as we're doing it, we intend to accelerate resilience uptake through the infusion of science, the infusion of climate knowledge into policies. You can see the infrastructure policies are more civil engineering approach. The projection is more the technical solutions. But all problems we have do not necessarily require technical solutions. You can have social solutions and economic solutions and resilience solutions that comes with it. And to us, with the GCA-funded project, I actually have to say that, and thank you to GCA for allowing us to develop this model. What we are trying to do is, we can't do it without having, in each local place, somebody who knows about climate change and infrastructure to support the daily implementation of the local policy. So our sense of action in that very issue is to develop a masterclass program where we train massively people at local level, stakeholders, the private sector, and students to know about these issues, because this kind of training is lacking in our universities, and classically, the type of training are not going in that direction. And finally, you can't do these things without having a sense of innovation. We need to innovate. There is no blanket solution. There is no silver bullet. We need to create some innovation, and innovation comes with the youth. We have to create an incubation hubs where the youth knows there are job opportunities, can be green jobs, to de-risk infrastructure and to move forward. So I will, before we come to the solutions, if you allow me, I want to put on the table a few hunch that we learned already from this project with our gaps and barriers that prevent us to move forward in that. The first barrier is what we call at Centre de Suivi Écologique the services barriers. Because you do railroad for a purpose, you do a toll road for a purpose, for the service of food, for delivering electricity, delivering this and that. There's a huge divide between the urban centers and the rural centers. There's a huge divide between the most vulnerable to the aristocratic social class. So, there is a sense of equity and just transitions that needs to be addressed properly in this regard. The second gap we have is a knowledge gap, which I think is very straightforward. I will jump over that. But we have what we call a geographic gap. In Africa, Senegal is part of them. Most of the population and the infrastructure lays on a small stripe of land, mostly sometimes across the coastal area. If you cut 200 kilometers inland to Nigeria, you will probably cut 80% of the economy. It's the same in Senegal. You'll cut 80% of the population. It's the same in Senegal, in Cote d'Ivoire, etc. So the sense of geographical balance in responding to infrastructure is something critical. The third one is related to the first one, the sense of remoteness and connectivity. You do railroad to go take some goods or to deliver goods, but there are some places which is so remote that people do not have a sense to put a road. And the road is actually a solution to adaptation to them. Infrastructure will play that role. And people do not necessarily invest on those infrastructure that address the vulnerable communities who are living in very harsh conditions in the Sahel. And that has some connections with all the conflicts that we have seen, because they're not connected, they're not part of the opportunities that the others have because they're located in a specific area. And finally, we want to raise the same issues of financial gap. I think you eloquently made it. You also, the bank, make it. And thank you for getting new facilities on the table and getting new opportunities to access funding. We can't resolve all those gaps and barriers without funding. On the second part, we will come and explain a few pointers on what the solutions we think for those old challenges. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Nicola, we heard about the analysis, and maybe from a more institutional perspective, what do you see the role of academia and science and universities of maybe helping to address those knowledge gaps, those planning gaps? Please, over to you.
So the role that academia can have, it's having a couple of main components that's already been touched by the other panelists. The first one is to provide and help to gather solid data, solid information that is required in order to understand which are the challenges, which are the problems, in order also to make some consideration with, like, what will be the cost of inaction, like in the case of the state of Lagos. That will also help to understand which are, to benchmark alternative options. Is the railway good or a road better for a specific context? And science can help to do that from one side, but it requires to have a local understanding of infrastructure. It's not that science will come like a beam of light illuminating everybody. And that is linking to my second point that I will belay in a second. There is another important role that the science should play and research should play. This is the one to communicate to different actors in appropriate manners what are the data, what are the findings, and informed decision making. And this is not done, unfortunately, just publishing research papers. That's an activity that we should continue to do, but we need to translate the result of our work in a way that's comprehensible for local planners, for policymakers at national level, and for intermediate organizations, bilateral and multilateral, that are operating in the ground. And then, last but not least, as practically everybody has already been mentioning, it's the question of capacities. Now, African Development Bank Group, I'm aware, and you mentioned it, is doing massive work on that. There are some bottlenecks that capacity can and shall provide for. First one, there is a need to receive better prepared projects. There is a need to build that capacity, to build this project, also like the training that you mentioned a little bit before. And not to have somebody coming from outside to do the project and then let it there and let's hope everything is fine in 6 months' time when the one that prepared not there. There is also the issue of how you are assessing these projects. And this type of analysis can actually be a tool for an appraisal, a quick appraisal. Is there the alignment between a local project that ICT is proposing and the national priority? Is there an alignment between the actual risk on the ground? Does this make sense? Finally, we have also a more systemic type of capacity that needs to be in place. to look not just for traditional solutions that are the great solution, but also to find a solution that are nature-based, solutions that are not based on single clusters, on single sectors. We cannot just make a project for mitigation here, one for adaptation there, one looking at floods, another looking at droughts. We need to integrate the knowledge. And this is another key capacity we make. And I close it there and let everybody to continue the discussion.
Thank you very much. Nitin, Global Center of Adaptation is a world-known service knowledge hub on adaptation. What are you doing to support resilient infrastructure and nature-based solutions in Africa?
Thank you, Marcus. We, the African Development Bank and the Global Center on Adaptation, launched the Africa Adaptation Acceleration Program, the AAAP, last year. And the common thread within AAAP's response to resilient infrastructure is actually represented by this panel here today, where we have the multilateral development banks represented, we have international institutions, the public sector, national institutions of excellence, academia, and us as GCA positioned as a solutions broker. But the common thread is to start breaking down some of these silos. Because when it comes to resilient infrastructure, the starting point has to be, well, what does the science tell us about this projected climate risk? Because without that data, we're not talking about anything real. We're just making up stuff about adaptation. But within AAAP, we work at 3 levels. The first is at the national scale, where we see the need to work with governments to prioritize adaptation investments at a national scale. And the rationale here is quite straightforward. We can't afford to make every single infrastructure asset 100% climate resilient. There has to be some element of understanding, well, where are the greatest risks? And the risks can't just be monetary. It has to also include, as was said earlier, the services provided through these infrastructure assets. So a road that's very expensive might cost a lot if it's damaged by a flood, but there might be another road or in a rural area that's the only link between a community and the closest health center. So these factors need to be considered when we're prioritizing investments at a national scale. And so this year in Ghana, we launched our first roadmap for climate resilient infrastructure. And the African Development Bank's country team is now using that to help shape the next pipeline of investment and other partners as well. The next level is at and I should also mention that we are now scaling up this process and in Senegal with our colleagues from CSE and UCAD who are with us here today. The next thing is that we work at the asset level, and this is, Mike had already mentioned this, where within a project really bringing in the state-of-the-art data to understand exposure, to quantify that exposure, and to translate exposure into operational metrics. And I emphasize this because, again, it's really important to take the climate data and to make sense of it in our day-to-day lives. So in the port of Banjul, for example, we're not just looking at, well, what is the temperature rise, what is the sea level rise? We're then translating that into operational metrics like, what does this mean for operational downtime, average operational downtime across months and across years? And we are actually launching a project with a railway investment project in Uganda, so it would be great to collaborate on that. So the national, the asset, and then we've already sort of discussed, a number of panelists have discussed the need for capacity. And one of the products that GCA developed with the African Development Bank and other multilateral development banks, including the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, Islamic Development Bank, etc., was the masterclass on climate resilient infrastructure PPPs. Now, we all understand that PPPs are one way of bringing in the private sector to finance and operate more resilient infrastructure. But what we've observed is that there's not a clear understanding of what climate change has to do with an infrastructure PPP, particularly actually in regions like the Sahel, where, for example, we're working on an energy program, and it wasn't necessarily understood, well, what does climate change have to do with rural renewable energy investment? So the masterclass on climate resilient infrastructure PPPs helps address some of these knowledge gaps. I'll pause over there and let Marcus take the next question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we have a lot of common wisdom on the panel and common knowledge. We have heard a lot of actions that are already happening for more climate resilient and low carbon infrastructure across Africa. I won't end this panel without having a clear way forward, with a clear one solution, one key to scale up and speed up action for more resilient African cities and countries. So I would like to ask you maybe for a short vision, for a short solution on how we can all together build more resilient infrastructure, supporting low carbon and sustainable development of African countries and cities. And I would like to mix up the order a little bit. I would like to have the last word, our African megacity, Lagos, to have the last word. So I would like to start maybe at the global level, maybe with the Union of Railways. Give us one solution, one concrete way of working together for more resilient Africa.
Okay. It's really hard to pick one, of course, isn't it? Because we came here talking about three things. So first one, clear targets and strategy. Like strategic thinking, because we found that the real success is if you not just plan for the strategy for transport, but plan it with energy, for example, you can electrify your railway with clean new energy if you've planned for really good renewable energy production at the same time. Because if you're going to have a decarbonized electric railway that's reliable, then you need to have that strategic planning along with other sectors. So I think it's like that, yes, international cooperation, but cross-sector cooperation could make a real step change in terms of joined-up thinking across that. So I would pick that but joined with targets, real clear targets, a modal shift target for sustainable modes of transport with a decarbonising target for transport overall, in fact. So real clear sort of strategy. This is where we're going. This is our clear vision of what the kind of African mobility that we want, and make that clear to the whole continent. There's sort of a common vision. I think I would do that. And so you can back that up then with policy, with fiscal policy that really incentivizes that really encourages people to use low carbon forms of transport so that they can make that shift. We were talking before we joined the panel about, yeah, but railways, they don't make any money, right? So why would we invest in those? But it's really understanding the value of that investment. What is the investment for? Because usually with things like walking, cycling, and public transport, the value is found in your health systems. Usually, actually, if you've got a really good public transport, walking, cycling, you've got a healthier city, you've got healthier people, right? So really turning on its head what we mean by investment and value from really investing in low carbon resilient mobility systems. And so I don't know if that's one thing, it's lots of things I know, but that's real strategic thinking and system thinking, I think. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Nicola, coming to you, the global scientific community and your profession, and specifically, what will we do to make cities more resilient and infrastructure adapt to climate change?
I will start with the one thing that is necessary and also something to enable this thing to happen. So the one thing is necessary is that there should be a better integration, alignment and understanding in between national level policies, local level action and all the intermediate levels. And this is very hard to do. And that's why together we prepare this in order to contribute to go in that direction. Because otherwise we are dispersing our work, our resources for doing that. And that gets to the enabling force behind it. That's very clear among organizations working with knowledge, with science and all that. We have the tendency not to speak much among each other and to replicate the same type of developing a new capacity building training, each one for its own, and reinventing more or less the same thing. So we need to have more collaboration, more open and clear collaboration as enabling in order to facilitate the integration national policies and local level, in order that local action can really contribute to raise the ambition of national policies. That for climate is essential. And national level shall support local action that's really aligned and integrated, something that matters on the ground at local level. And that's all.
Thank you very much. Nitin, adaptation, resilient cities and infrastructure. What can we do together to scale up and speed up action in Africa?
I suspect my boss would want me to say the one solution is the AAAP. But what I am instead going to say is, and I really, really, truly believe in this point, which is that we really need to democratize access to and an understanding of the data on projected climate risk. It's very abstract when we get out of this room, where maybe more and more, many of us have been part of these conversations and know the right people, and I can call up, the University of Oxford and ask a specific question. But the average person working in the infrastructure sectors has no understanding or access to this. And I really believe that if we have this data readily available, people will start innovating in ways that we can't imagine right now. And maybe one sort of example of, even just from my own work, where I was working on a urban utility program, water program in Hargeisa. And I could not for the life of me figure out, well, what is the projected climate risk for the source of water for the city? And this was someone who is, within networks that have this data and is keen to find this data. So you can imagine other utilities that don't have that luxury. So that would be my sort of one, the catalytic thing that we can do is to democratize access to and then understanding of the climate risk data. And from that, I have no doubt that innovation will flow.
Thank you. Dr. Mbao, Senegal is a leading African country of adaptation. What can we do to scale up and speed up even more in Senegal and beyond?
There is more to say on that question that we can say in a session. But I would like to skim on a few ideas about 3 points. First of all is the traditional practice of building a railroad or a road and just assume that this road would survive climate change is no more a model. We need to put in place things that goes with that infrastructure, which are helping respond to climate change. And one point we are trying to do in Senegal is how to do a whole regreening of the toll roads, the big highways. And we start with a railroad which is called Ila Touba, linking the two big cities, Dakar and Touba, and to have forest stripes along those roads to resolve many issues, reduce flooding, include ecosystem services, provide biomass for animals who used to use that area for browsing. So the fact of greening the infrastructure is one aspect. But what the things which comes with it, and that speaks with the mitigation dimension that it was up here in the NDCs, is the relative decarbonization that goes with infrastructure. Infrastructure has a big carbon footprint from the material constructions to its investment. But how do we offset that carbon footprint by putting trees and making sure it's green and maintained to respond to some of those issues? And that brings me to the third solution, which is how to create green jobs in relationship with those infrastructure, circularity in economy, creating vocational jobs in maintaining the climate responses that goes with infrastructure, supporting local governments in securing their infrastructure. That creates new vocational work, which we can call green jobs, to respond to the youth, population, useful population of Africa in that very respect. The final point which I want to make is the governance structure in place. Because if you take infrastructure, the financial services and other services, as he rightly said, a colleague from Denmark, they don't talk each other. Even here in the negotiation, people who are negotiating finance for adaptation and people who are negotiating infrastructure, they're not talking to each other. And you can't have infrastructure without funding. And if you have funding, it's something to respond to infrastructure. And infrastructure is encompassing. There's no place in adaptation where infrastructure is not coming. It's absolutely critical to create a framework, at least at national level, where we create that connection, the connection of willing between those two entities. And finally, I think in terms of integration, we should rebuild a rhetoric. Rather than climate for infrastructure, it should be climate in infrastructure, because when they do the business model of infrastructure, they don't factor in climate change. A recent project that we have in Senegal for bus rapid transit has saved 15% of the investment to be invested into responses to future climate change, water drainage, protecting the infrastructure itself. I think it's a worth investment to be factored in to the business model of building infrastructure, not just the civil engineering and the business as usual, but we need now to factor in the requirement of investment to protect those infrastructure against climate risk. These are a few areas which we want to share and which are already being put in place in Senegal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Commissioner, cities in Africa are looking what Lagos is doing. Rightfully are looking towards the mega city to lead the way. What is Lagos doing, and what can we do together to build more resilient cities in Africa, and how we can build a more resilient Lagos together?
Okay, I think the first thing is to imagine, right? And I think sometimes we are not imagining enough. So if we take Lagos, 25 million people, the economic hub of Nigeria, and we are overthinking it, can we then imagine what will happen if 25 million people decide to migrate? What it will do to destabilize the economies or the situations in the West African sub-region. And I think because we are not imagining enough, we are not acting quickly enough. Because we talk about this, right, and we make commitments that now look like wishful thinking, right, because we are not taking action. And what Lagos has done, Lagos has said, let's remove the excuses. We talked about data and evidence-based evaluation. Lagos has done it. We've talked about there not being enough projects that are bankable. Lagos has itemized about 38 bankable projects for adaptation, right? We're talking about the political will. That does not apply to Lagos because we have the political will to act. So the question is, so why don't we act? So what I'm saying is that Lagos presents that opportunity for us to act. We are ready to act. We have the projects to act. We have the programs to act. But we are also acting on our own. I told you about a new city coming out of rising seawater, Eco-Atlantic City. We're talking about planning for 6 rail lines. You hardly see a subnational do that on its own. So where are the partners? We want them to come now, right? This other thing I would like to talk about is the idea we have shared at COP27 that adaptation happens at the community. So development partners must figure out how to work with subnationals because where the shoe pinches tend to act faster, right? Work with us, develop the solution together with us, and then we can go to the national government pointedly to say, let's work on this particular project in the subnational. Because once you dump it at the national level, sometimes it gets lost. It could get lost in politics, it could get lost in, it's not my own, or all kinds of things it could get lost in. So I think it's something we need to take very seriously in the way we work, right? We cannot put where it pinches on the blind side of policy and think somehow federal governments or national governments would better articulate the situation that you have yourself determined are better felt by local governments. I think the last thing would be to say that in those analyses, and we have done it, we must learn how to prioritize these projects based on the socioeconomic return. So we know which one we do first and which one we do second, given that the resources available globally are not infinitely elastic, right? I think the last thing I would like to say is we need to then figure out how to galvanize citizen action. I normally say that, governments have limited funding. They probably get 15% to 20 to 25% of taxes in Africa. It is what people and corporations do with the balance 75% in the way they invest, in the way they save, in the instruments that we create as development banks and national banks to mobilize, right, that helps the fund flow. And really, we should be, especially when we look at the African continent, we should be able to mobilize in more significant way funding that are available in the African continent and are in the hands of the private sector and in the hands of citizens. And I think development partners are in a pole's position to create instruments that strengthen the risk perception of these national initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Mike, we're Africa's bank. Africa is banking on us. How are we making this happen now?
Well, I think my job, I thought, was initially easier because I was going to speak last. But I see a lot of challenges here addressed to us as a bank. A lot has been said. I think the panelists have done a great job to provide a way forward, the solutions. We need to act. I think that's what the Lagos commissioners say, act. So what I can say here, just to add to what they have been eloquently presented by my co-panelists, is that the issue of financing, the solution goes through private sector as well. And I'm glad that the commissioner just mentioned it. We have wealth of resources in private sector hands, and also ideas, the solution, innovation is in their hands. But for them to come to the table, that's where we need our government to do the appropriate regulation, appropriate incentive that will, enable private sector investment. Because at the end of the day, it has to do with maximizing their profit and also doing business opportunity. Because climate change is a business opportunity as well to do things differently and have innovation. That's something that private sector does best. So we need to mobilize the private sector. Another bank, we have instrument. I heard a lot of de-risking here. We have instrument to de-risk private sector investment on behalf of government. We have what we call a PCD, a partial credit guarantee, that really provide guarantee for private sector to give them comfort. In the event of default from government, which rarely happen, and I think we have a perception issue also in African investment. You will be pleased to know that Moody's Analytics has actually classified African infrastructure asset class as the less riskier in the world. Less risky in the world. So this is something that the general public doesn't know, but we are bringing that message to investors. It's a huge de-risking message. Huge. And this is based on data again. Analysis. It's not done by the bank, neither by the government of Nigeria or Senegal, but it's by Moody's Analytics. Moody's is a global firm. So it's very important that we actually bring out the data, the actual data is what is happening in Africa to enable investment from private sector. The second thing I would say is the issue of modal shift. And I think my colleague here has mentioned that. We need to move people from road to rail. We need to move the freight from road to rail. It makes economic sense. It's cheaper to drive freight through the rail, and it's also climate friendly. Rail is actually among the least contributor to greenhouse emission. It's a least. So we need to do that. And I was talking to her today, just before the panel, that we are looking at the rail renaissance in Africa. It's coming. We are feeling it in African Development Bank. Countries are making a lot of effort. Nigeria here, Senegal there, those two countries are investing heavily in railway over the last 5 years. The Tier 1, Tier 2 in Senegal, all the railroad, Kano, Ibadan, Lagos rail, and many other African countries. So we need to support rail, And I'm here, we are actually looking at the MOU together with the International Association of Railway, with the African Development Bank, which we are already working on, and we want to finalize this in Q1 of next year to help African to bring that knowledge. And the third thing is we need to think about e-mobility, infrastructure, modern infrastructure, urban development infrastructure that will project us into tomorrow, into climate resilient cities. So e-mobility is one of them, e-buses, and we are supporting those programs with some of the African countries already. And last but not least, I mentioned earlier on the AGEA initiative that the bank is leading with like-minded institutions. The AGEA is really going to scale up and speed up our action to support great infrastructure in Africa and climate adaptation. So I think we have covered a lot of ground here today, and we'll make a huge a step forward in the solution. What we now need to do is act, but we must only act collectively. And I'm going to pursue and challenge us here that we continue this discussion, pursue it and act. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks to our distinguished panel. Thanks to our guest. Lots of work to do for sustainable urban development in Africa and sustainable infrastructure development in Africa. And it has been said many times, and I'll just repeat what others have said more eloquently before me. There's an old saying in Africa: if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go together, you go. If you want to go far, you go together. So, in that sense, at the African Development Bank, we're very, very grateful to have partners like you working on this with us together, and I would like to thank you. But we also have partners that are supporting us financially. Lots of work has to be done in preparing projects and engaging cities and working with partners towards developing and financing sustainable urban developments, financing sustainable urban infrastructure. And the African Development Bank has created a specific project preparation facility and vehicle to support cities across the continent, improve urban planning, improve urban governance, and develop projects that can be financed by the bank. We are extremely grateful to have lead partners with us today. The government of Switzerland and the government of Spain have just supported us already in our first phase and are support us also for our second phase. I would like to invite the government of Spain and Switzerland maybe to join us on the panel. Thanks to our guests. I would like to relieve you. Mike, if you could just be here. I would like to invite first Julian Voleri, Program Manager from SECO, the Swiss Economic Secretariat for Economic Cooperation. I hope that was half right. And afterwards, Ramón López Pérez from the Ministerio de la Economía y Transición Digital to maybe say a few words on how your governments are supporting the Urban Municipal Development Fund. And Mike, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Switzerland and SECO are very happy to make this announcement here at COP to contribute to the UMDF with around 5 million Swiss francs. We're also very pleased in general with the very good cooperation between Switzerland and the African Development Bank. I also speak on behalf of my colleagues in Bern who worked on this contribution to the UMDF, and also on behalf of our head of delegation, here at COP, who unfortunately could not join us today. Of course, we are very close to the finish line of the COP, so he's very busy with the negotiations. Now we see UMDF as a key instrument of the African Development Bank to support integrated, resilient, low-emission urban development in Africa. And we just heard from the panel how critical this is due to the rapid rates of urbanization on the continent. So it's perhaps more critical than in the rest of the world, and it's also widely recognized in the African NDCs, as we've heard. So yeah, there is a dire need in Africa for urban planning, diagnostics, project preparation in this sphere, and also, of course, financial support to address these widening gaps. So as our ambassador in SECO and Bern, Dominic Paradivicini said, after the successful establishment of the African Cities Program, the UMDF should now be scaled up to support more cities throughout the African continent, which is why Switzerland increased its contribution. A part of that is included for cities in emerging countries, such as here in Egypt, also in Ghana, in South Africa. Also very pleased to hear from the panel about the partnerships that exist around this topic on the continent. I mean, we heard that there is work by the climate funds, by national entities, municipalities, and also, of course, by the African Development Bank, other MDBs. And this is what COP is all about. It's about connecting institutions that work on the same challenges and address them together. So echo the panel on the good collaboration on this, and also echo the panel on perhaps the needs to even increase collaboration with the private sector, as well as the insurance sector on resilience, on adaptation. The private sector can also bring innovation, as we heard from the panel, and Switzerland is also doing work on that, for instance, with the World Bank and through the Insure Resilience Partnership. So again, very pleased to be here. Thank you for the African Development Bank for the invitation, and happy to announce this contribution to the UMDF. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Firstly, let me present myself. I am Ramon López, Senior Advisor at the Ministry of Economic Affairs in Spain. We are mainly involved in our daily, on a daily basis on the climate funds, Global Environmental Facility, Green Climate Fund, climate investment funds, but also we are interested in the climate initiatives from the NDBs. So, it's a pleasure for me to be here with that in this pavilion, this Africa pavilion, because Spain recognizes the significant role of the African Development Bank that played in fostering the economic and social progress in Africa. Firstly, I would like to say that for us, cities is a crucial point. Fighting against climate change is a crucial battlefield in terms of mitigation, adaptations. UN foresees that by 2050, 70% of population will live in cities. So this is going to be a crucial point, especially in Africa. A lot of sectors, emitting sectors, has its reflects in cities. I'm talking about buildings, mobility, energy efficiency, also adaptation measures. So at the end, it's very visible, even for citizens, the interventions in cities. And it's especially important when we build new city, new urban development initiatives, urban planning. It's at the very first moment, it's crucial to have a sustainable mindset. I think it has been said this morning, the importance of knowledge and share knowledge between stakeholders, private sector, academia in these initiatives. Even citizens, because as I have said previously, intervention in cities are very visible and they can replicate these behaviors in their daily life. I'm talking about energy efficiency, waste management, etc. So for us, cities, as I have said, is a crucial point in this fight against climate change. In times of uncertainty and despite the current generalized budgetary constraints following the expenses due to the COVID-19 pandemic, our new contribution reaffirms the strong support of Spain to the African Development Bank. We are confident of the Urban Municipal Development Fund addressing urbanization from a climate resilience perspective, one of the main challenges of the region and one of our main priorities for our development agenda. So thank you very much. We are very pleased to contribute, and we look forward to receiving news on outcomes and scaling up of this initiative. Thank you very much.
To really thank our development partners, to the government of Switzerland and the government of Kingdom of Spain for their generous contribution. We heard they just announced each one of them 5 million euros. So we have 10 million euros sitting right here in front of you. Yeah. And that 10 million euros is to support you. We heard the panel now from Senegal, Nigeria, what a brilliant work they are doing and how they need more resources to support what they are doing to adapt to climate change and project themselves into city of tomorrow. So this is possible through the African Development Bank because of our partners that we have here today. So the government of Spain and the government of Switzerland that have been at the forefront of the UMDF, which is an Urban Municipality Development Fund by the bank. I recall when the bank had this vision to really be a step ahead of the curve by putting together his strategy for urban development. We say, okay, great, it's good to have a policy and a strategy, but we need instruments to deliver the actions on the policy and strategy. One of them is to say we're going to have a focus team at the bank, which is a division called Urban Development Division. It didn't exist in the bank 10 years ago, so we created this. Now there's a new full-fledged division in the bank, capacitated with people to lead on the bank urban development. Second, now that we have people, we need financial instruments to catalyze our actions in urban development. So we thought about the creation of a trust fund, which is a UMDF. But at the time we faced challenges. We have the ideas, everything was fine, but we needed seed funding. The bank contributed seed funding, but before in the bank you create a trust fund, you need at least one donor, one partner donor. And Switzerland was there. Switzerland was there from the beginning to make this fund happen. So I really want you to show our gratitude to the government of Switzerland for being with us from the very beginning to enable the creation of this fund. Thank you very much. And now that we have a partner to create the fund, we need to expand the fund. Expanding the fund, we need to go and talk to like-minded donors and development partners. Spain is not at its first contribution in the bank in terms of promoting climate change or green infrastructure or urban development. There's another fund called the NEPAR IPPF, which the government of Spain has already contributed to as the 5th development partners 3 years ago. And that also enabled us, thank you, that NEPAR IPPF enabled us to do regional projects. And that shows you how Spain is also supporting African development agenda. And then they came to UMDF to support the bank, Switzerland, and other donors that we have now, which is Denmark also is coming on board. So the government of Switzerland, of Spain is also now contributing. So, but one thing I want to say here before I close my remarks is that we are not only getting financial contribution from the two governments, we're also getting the contribution of their private sector and innovation. I was myself lucky to be in Zurich 2 weeks ago at the invitation of Swiss enterprise to the bank, and we met with private sector. They are doing brilliant things in Switzerland, and we want to bring them to Africa. That was the purpose of my trip there, and we had a bank team, 3 of us, met with your private sector, have a discussion with them, and how we can facilitate and catalyze the investment into Africa. And I think this is possible because you are with us on many other fronts. Same thing in Spain. I was also pleased to have been invited to Spain 2 years just before the COVID, where at the invitation of the ministry, your ministry, and we had a deep engagement with your private sector. on African infrastructure opportunities, because we have major Spanish companies that build infrastructure everywhere in the world. We know you are very present in Latin America, Saudi Arabia, Middle East, and all that. We say, okay, why don't you come to Africa? So that was the purpose. So now we are seeing more and more Spanish firms delivering innovative infrastructure solutions in Africa. This is what we want. We want a package solution. We want the financing is true, it's important, but the ideas, the knowledge, the innovation, the private sector engagement, this is what we want. So I want to thank you for your contribution. Your 10 million that you put now is not the end of the tunnel. It's just the beginning of your contribution. So we're looking forward to scale up this contribution. And we thank you very much for this gracious contribution to the bank. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to the audience for being with us here from 9 o'clock in the morning. And this is the end of our event. And I would like to wish you a successful last 1 or 2 days at COP. And thank you very much.
you.